Welcome back to Movies TV Mad. You can follow me on Twitter at Movies TV Mad. I am Mick, your host with the most. A very warm welcome to Tuesday's edition of the DC Universe Daily. On today's show, I give you and read out to you the first plot synopsis for Blue Beetle. Then we discuss a huge week for James Gunn and Peter Safran at DC Universe as they attempt to pitch their idea going forward for DC Universe to Warner Brothers Discovery CEO David Zaslav. We discuss the most probable scenario and the most improbable scenario. Will he accept the pitch? Will he refute the pitch? And if he does, what does that mean for the futures of Peter Safran and James Gunn? And then we will discuss on the latter part of today's DC Universe Daily, has DC live action successfully moved on from Zack Snyder? But first, let's take a look at the first plot synopsis for Blue Beetle. Recent college graduate Jamie Reyes Xolo Maradona returns home full of aspirations for his future, only to find that home is not quite as he left it. It begins as he searches to find his purpose in the world. Fate intervenes when Jamie, wait for it, when Jamie unexpectedly finds himself in possession of an ancient relic of alien biotechnology, the Scarab. When the Scarab suddenly chooses Jamie to be its symbiotic host, he is bestowed with an incredible suit of armor capable of extraordinary and unpredictable powers. The description concludes, forever changing his destiny as he becomes the superhero Blue Beetle. So, this is interesting because when you look at this kind of synopsis, it's not very exciting. It's very matter of fact. It doesn't really tell you what the Scarab does and what it is. It doesn't really go into full detail, but you do kind of get an apt description. I think it's a very interesting film, Blue Beetle. I think it's one of the ones that, if there is a big chance for a huge successful DC movie next year, it probably is Blue Beetle, because it doesn't have the added baggage of the other movies, like Shazam! Fury of the Gods, Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom, Amber Heard, of course. The Flash movie has got so much bad baggage attached to it. And so I think Blue Beetle is kind of, in a way, a fresh start for DC. I know it's probably not, the new start that James Gunn and Peter Safran are planning, still part of the old leadership, but it's a film that kind of stands on its own. It is part of the old DCEU. It was originally supposed to mention Superman and Supergirl, which is interesting because we don't even know if Henry Cavill is going forward as Superman in any universe, whether it's the DC Extended Universe or the new DC Universe. So I think that Blue Beetle is a great character within the comics and animation. Whether this film is fit for purpose, we'll have to wait and see. So, this is a huge week for DC Universe. This is the week that Peter Safran and James Gunn pitched their DC Universe blueprint. And there are two scenarios here where the pitch is accepted by Warner Brothers Discovery CEO David Zaslav, or it is refused. So in the unlikely scenario that he refutes this pitch, what happens to James Gunn and Peter Safran will be very, very interesting. I'm expecting him not to refuse or refute this pitch. I'm expecting him to accept it and love it. But this is a CEO that shelved Batgirl after it finished production. In fact, we found out an HBO Max show that was already greenlit for a season 2 and has been shot has now been cancelled by David Zaslav on Warner Brothers Discovery at HBO Max. This is a very unpredictable CEO, everyone. He can't be trusted to make the decision you think he's going to make. So what will happen if he says, I don't like your pitch? Will he tell them to go back and think again? or will that, will he fire them? It's an interesting situation. And as I say, it's an unlikely scenario that he says, no, I don't like this. Most probably he's going to love it, but they've only had a few weeks to put this together. I'm very surprised that they're actually putting a pitch together after 3 or 4 weeks, because he himself, when people ask him some questions, James Gunn goes, well, I haven't been here that long. Well, you're the one telling us what your plan is before you've even pitched it, mate. So really the fault is with you, or is it with David Zaslav pressuring you to come up with a pitch so soon? Because at the end of the day, if it is a bad pitch, if Zaslav does refute the pitch, is it really James and Peter's fault, or is it Zaslav's fault for rushing them? Zaslav is a very, very desperate, money-hungry CEO. He's taken over a company that is a disaster zone, the dumbest company in Hollywood, and that's official. After last week's Boris Kitt Hollywood Reporter revelations, that's been confirmed yet again. But he's a very desperate individual. He needs to find $3 or $4 billion for the company. The company is in heavy debt. It's not made a lot of money on content in a very, very long time. So this is a very desperate CEO, and he's pressuring the co-chairs of DC Studios to come up with some magic. And so, yes, a big week for them. What will the pitch be? Will it be leaked? Will the pitch be leaked? This is very, very interesting, because already we're getting leaks. We had leaks last week about what's going on. What will we get this week? It's going to be a very, very, very unique week in the history of DC live action. And, what is that pitch? I don't think it's much of a secret what that pitch is. He's basically told us on Twitter what that pitch is. And I hate going over it all again, but it's not all. There's not much to it. It's basically one story on multiple platforms. That's it. It's not that deep. It's not that expansive. So let's see what Zaslav makes of it. Clearly, they have ideas of a slate, an unofficial slate. They will give him the slate that they would like to work on. Now, he claims Superman is the most important thing and character at DC right now. In fact, he said Superman is the main priority at DC Studios. So it'll be interesting in their pitch what part Superman plays in their blueprint. And we'll have to wait and see. But I do feel by the end of this week, we will know if he accepts this pitch or not. And if he doesn't accept this pitch, the consequences for Gunn and Safran could be immediate. This is a CEO that, as I say, is very, very erratic and could make any decision here. So, yeah, we'll wait and see what happens. Now, for me, the pitch isn't a hard reboot. It's a soft reboot. And now we're going to discuss the famous old soft reboot situation at DC going back to before Gunn and Safran. Because we're going to ask the question today here on Tuesday's edition of the DC Universe Daily, if DC live action has moved on successfully from Zack Snyder, and the answer, the factual answer, is no. It doesn't matter whether you like Snyder or hate Snyder, love his movies or hate his DC movies. The studio has not moved on successfully from him. He was moved on from the DCEU back in 2017. That's around 5 years ago. And we're still discussing Snyder. We're still discussing his trilogy and the other projects he had planned for DC. So we haven't moved on successfully from Zack Snyder. But why? I will tell you why. How did they first plan on moving on from Zack Snyder? Justice League, the most lowest points in Warner Brothers history. An embarrassment of a film rushed with colours injected to it, a few smiles and gags that didn't work, and a helmet on Steppenwolf instead of the great, groundbreaking VFX Zack Snyder used in the Snyder Cut. This was their plan to move on from Zack Snyder because they were too lazy to say to Joss Whedon and Geoff Johns, start again. You have the talent to do something vast and infinite and interesting. Go out there and do it. No, they wanted to cheat their way to success, and their answer to moving Zack Snyder on was Justice League, and it was utter hilarity. It was heartbreaking for true DC fans, and we didn't move on. After Justice League, Walter Hamada took over and again attempted to move on from Zack Snyder. Now, initially with Aquaman that made over $1 billion, the only movie in the franchise that's made anywhere near that money. And the next one is BVS with $850 million. So Aquaman was a great DC comic book movie. I enjoyed it. It looked like we were finally getting to a place where maybe things could work. The success of Aquaman was miraculous because you're only as good as your last movie. You're only as good in football as your last game. And their last game was Justice League. So for the audience to have faith in a DC movie straight away, the next DC movie after said calamity was extraordinary, miraculous. Then we went to Shazam, a really good film for families and children. It worked. It made 3 times its budget, but it didn't even make $400 million globally. So it was a successful movie. It was a good movie. It was a solid movie, but still it didn't have a lot of interest from audiences. So then, outside of the DCEU, we had Joker, a movie Walter Hamada, the former DC film president, didn't want to go forward with and had doubts on. He had doubts on it because it was being made by an auteur. They'd already dealt with Snyder. He saw red flags. Ultimately, Toby Emmerich said, F off, Walter. You get on with your cinematic universe. I'll deal with Todd. Todd's going to do whatever the fuck he wants. And, the suits, the higher-ups of Warner Brothers were right to have faith in this project. But they didn't have as much faith in Todd as they should have done because basically investment was shared with 2 or 3 other companies. So WB didn't make as much money as they would have done. But ultimately, they did allow the man to make his movie. It's a beautiful, wondrous, standalone movie outside of the DC Extended Universe that made a lot of money. And so with Aquaman and Shazam and now Joker, DC was heading to a successful place. But Joker wasn't without its controversies, of course. Nothing to do with the movie as such. It was just progressives being a-holes. It's the only thing they know what to do. Anyway, from that we went to the disastrous Birds of Prey. Walter Hamada and Toby Emmerich allowed Margot Robbie to be in charge of the Birds of Prey production. She decided that Harley Quinn would star in this movie, her first biggest mistake, and progressive director Cathy Yan was put in charge, a woman who's a very good, capable indie director, but didn't have any clue to make or direct a production as huge as this. She messed it up. Let's not go into details. We've been round it. Flopped. And then James Gunn's The Suicide Squad as well. A really good film, although some of the decision-making within this film was interesting. It was an interesting decision to kill off Rick Flag and Captain Boomerang, 2 of my favourite characters from the first Suicide Squad movie, but of course they weren't James Gunn's characters, so he killed them off. He didn't kill off Harley Quinn, of course, and we all know why, even though James was telling us he could kill anyone off, but he refused. Anyway, it's a good movie, and I enjoyed it, but it was a flop. Wonder Woman 84, we've discussed this before, terrible movie. Simple as that. Let's not spend too much time on it. So now you can see a pattern of failure. And it continued. Then they decided they had 2 decisions. They were thinking about, prior to Wonder Woman 84, they were thinking of turning Wonder Woman 84 into a Flashpoint movie, which took the DCEU into a new timeline. So it wasn't a hard reboot, just a little bit of a soft reboot. So what I can tell you about this is, in terms of the idea of Flashpoint in Wonder Woman 84. It was all to do with Steve Trevor. Basically, Diana makes a decision to keep Steve Trevor with her. This changes the timeline. That was the original idea. They decided not to go with it, but I may or may have not have seen a test screening with this version of the situation and the new timeline within it. I can't say any more than that. Anyway, moving on from that, they decided to take the Flash movie starring Ezra Miller, and Walter Hamada got involved with his long-term director over at New Line Cinema and his former horror division, Andy Muschietti, to make a Flashpoint movie that was going to cut the best things out of the Flashpoint graphic novel. The reason for making this film is to take the DCEU into another timeline. Again, not a hard reboot, but a soft reboot. Because a hard reboot would mean you'd have to work hard and you'd have to use your grey matter to mould the clay and do something vast, as we spoke about Justice League. They don't have the ambition to do this. So they decided, soft reboot, new timeline, get rid of Cavill, get rid of Batfleck, and he was planning some kind of crisis, final crisis, which would bring back Cavill and Batfleck eventually. But ultimately, for the time being, in this timeline, as you will most probably see next year, depending on what they've changed, Sasha Calle's Supergirl, Flashpoint Supergirl should I say, replaces Cavill's Superman, and basically that's what they were planning. And, you know, very, very elderly actor Michael Keaton, former Batman Michael Keaton, great Batman Michael Keaton, was going to replace Batfleck as the main DCEU Batman. But why? Because he's famous, popular, and it's another lazy decision. You don't need to create a younger Batman when you could chuck an already established popular Batman in there, and that's why they were doing it. Lazy, lazy, lazy. This was Hamada's plan, and who knows if it would have worked. Maybe that would have worked. Maybe a Batman Beyond starring Michael Keaton and Leslie Grace would have worked. But that was the plan. It was certainly not a hard reboot, but it was certainly a very different type of DC Extended Universe. But it was a soft reboot. And basically, it doesn't break anything. It just changes things a little bit. Yes, there would have been a lot of conflicting opinions about this situation. You should see that movie later next year and you can make your own minds up. Again, another lazy way to move away from Zack Snyder, which basically has no point in reality now, because that new timeline isn't even going to exist. Apparently the Flash movie is still unlocked and they're making changes all the time. So who knows what happens there and how much next year's movies have to do with the brand new DC Universe. By the way, the brand new DC Universe could, fail at its first kind of run with this pitch to David Zaslav this week. We'll have to wait and see. So we move on from Flashpoint, another lazy attempt to move away from Snyder, and now it's DC Universe. So what are they attempting to do? Well, we've already discussed it on the top of the show, but basically I can pretty much tell you, and James Gunn's pretty much told you, keeping what works, aka the stuff that Gunn and Safran have already worked on and worked with, and the characters they've worked with, and get rid of everything else. Again, it's another lazy, soft reboot, because this is another great opportunity. Justice League, great opportunity to start from scratch. The Flashpoint movie, another great opportunity to start from scratch. They rejected both of those opportunities. And now DC Universe, again, they will reject the opportunity to start from scratch, because getting rid of Affleck, who probably doesn't want to be involved anymore anyway, and Cavill, who desperately still wants to be involved, isn't brave, isn't bold, and you're still keeping a lot of the other elements. For me, a soft reboot is lazy, creatively bankrupt, and it's not going to work. And that's your DC Universe. Now, who knows what this is actually going to look like, and we won't know. We may never know what it's actually going to look like. It's an interesting thing because, they tried with Justice League, they failed. Flashpoint, the new Flashpoint timeline, even if we see it happen in the Flash movie, it's probably got nothing to do with the future, or they may mold it into something else. Who knows what kind of film we're going to see in the end. So what a mess. What do next year's movies mean? Who knows? Does the pitch for DC Universe go forward? We will find out at some point this week. So have we moved on successfully from Zack Snyder? No, we haven't, because we have seen inconsistency in the productions, in the quality of the movies, and more importantly for the studio's bottom line, the global box office hasn't been great, and it's got worse and worse and worse. Since the first Shazam, the box offices have got worse and worse and worse, and the general audience have been less and less interested in consuming this shit. So I'm not in the mind of James Gunn and Peter Safran. They might have something amazing planned. We'll have to wait and see. But I have my doubts. And I've had my doubts ever since that Hollywood Reporter article from Boris Kitt was released last week. It seems to me that it's not even the article that really kind of made me feel they're not going to do anything that different. It's what James Gunn said, which is keeping the things that work and not keeping the things that don't work, or improving them, or fixing the things that didn't work. This doesn't sound like a hard reboot to me. In fact, it doesn't really sound like any kind of reboot at all. But James Gunn has said conflicting things. This is why I talk about it. He talks too much and he keeps on contradicting himself. Because when someone asked him, when he posted the Blue Beetle poster, the only poster from next year's movies he's actually promoted or spoken about, and he hasn't spoken about Blue Beetle, he just posted the poster. When a fan said, does DC Universe start from Blue Beetle? He told the fan what we now know. We are proud to shepherd these great movies next year, but DC Universe starts after Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom. So let's be clear. Let's repeat that again. If the pitch is accepted by Zaslav, the plan, the blueprint from Peter Safran and James Gunn doesn't start until December of 2023's Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom, after that film, which basically says next year's films are not DC Universe. That's the assumption some fans believe and argue with me about. No, they're DCEU. They're not DC Universe. Who knows if they have the DC Universe new insignia up there just to confuse the matter even more. But no, James Gunn's been clear. The new universe starts after Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom. But that doesn't mean, by the way, that DCEU and DC Universe are not the same thing. It just means the movies they're doing kind of don't start yet because they haven't made any movies yet. It could just mean that. And the Flash movie could be used to, to kind of launch into the DC Universe franchise. And Blue Beetle could be part of DC Universe. Who the fuck knows? Because we don't even know what James Gunn means when he says a brand new universe. But something tells me by the end of this week, and by the time they've given this pitch to Zaslav, we're going to know a lot more. But I'm telling you that they have not successfully moved on from Snyder. Can James Gunn and Peter Safran finally move on from Zack Snyder? This is the huge question, everyone. And it's something we're not going to know really for a couple of years. But it will be interesting at the end of this week, because I do believe this pitch is going to be leaked. And this is your scenario. If Variety talk about it, because they're very, very aligned with Warner Brothers, by the way, always have been, I think it will be positive. And James Gunn's and Peter Safran's pitch would have been accepted by Zaslav. Now, if THR reveal anything, who are a more independent, unbiased publication, I think we may hear some very interesting news. And we know that Humberto Gonzalez from The Wrap has an inside ear at DC right now. So we are on Tuesday now. So I don't know what day they go in to pitch this. It's kind of exciting, isn't it? To find out what's going on. But yeah, I think it's unlikely he doesn't accept their pitch. But as I say, Zaslav is a very unpredictable figure. And he's running things right now, and you don't really know what's going to happen. We didn't really expect him to appoint Peter Safran and James Gunn as DC Studios co-chairs. It's a very, again, look, it's not like Peter Safran is a capable enough producer, and James Gunn's a good writer-director. But they are lazy appointments, and I'll tell you why, because they were there already, and everybody else said no to him. Who knows who he asked? But apparently he did ask Kevin Feige. I'd love to hear that conversation. Nah, mate, you're having a laugh. No way am I getting involved with that. Because it's a mess. Because no one wants to work under the reign of one dictator who's saying you can only do this and you can only do that. To go into this job, you have to have a freedom of expression. So you need to be able to make your own decisions. But we will find out a lot more, everyone. But no, we haven't successfully moved on from Zack Snyder. We may never move on successfully from Zack Snyder. And it's that situation. When they found his reign problematic, they had two scenarios that they should have done. Say to him, right, do what you're going to do, then go, and we can start from scratch, which he was more than willing to do. He's already told us that. Or get rid of him when they did in 2017 and start again. But instead, they tried to rebrand what he was trying to do in Justice League. And it was an absolute disastrous calamity. And this is what basically, the Flash movie is Justice League Mark II, where they're trying to rebrand again. And I believe DC Universe under James Gunn and Peter Safran, again, is attempting to rebrand this franchise. And rebranding isn't going to work because this is an audience and a consumer that's not stupid. Once they see your decisions on there and you've told them what you're planning, we're going to know what's a hard reboot and what's a soft reboot. And James Gunn's been calling this a new DC Universe. But how new is it? Well, in the last few minutes of today's DC Universe Daily, let's discuss what a new universe could mean. It could mean a rebranding of the old DCEU, but let's think about this very carefully. Let's say this Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom is Jason Momoa's final Aquaman movie, and he's looking to recast Aquaman and cast Jason Momoa as Lobo. I'm not saying it's happening. Let's say if it does happen, because they're the rumours. How is this even possible? Well, what does that mean for the old DCEU and next year's movies? That would look like, on the outside, that the old DCEU is being cancelled, or they could use the Flash movie to reignite a new timeline, as Walter Hamada was trying. And in that new timeline, there's no Jason Momoa Aquaman, but there is a Jason Momoa Lobo. So you either use Flash for a new timeline to do that, or after Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom, you put that franchise aside and you start again. Now, you know what I favour here. I favour to start from scratch. Now, I know some of you are holding on and saying, I don't want a reboot. But ultimately, as DC fans, you need to think about this as well. We've tried to move on from Zack Snyder within this franchise. It has not worked. The money's not coming in. So we could keep this natural order of things within the DCEU and rebrand it as DC Universe because you don't want to change actors, directors, and direction. But as you can see, if you're the only one sitting in the fucking cinema, what's the point? I'm not being literal here, by the way, so please don't say to me, well, there's loads of people when I go. We saw the Black Adam box office. By the way, before I go, there's another little update for you. Of course, again, the master, the Don, which is Mick, your host with the most, actually told you about this last week. Last week, a Deadline article a few hours before Boris Kitt's Hollywood Reporter expose on DC and James Gunn's and Peter Safran's plans, right? A few hours before this, The Rock and Deadline brought out an article saying that Variety's claims that Black Adam was a flop were wrong and misleading, and in fact, Black Adam made 50 million profit. Warner Brothers are now saying publicly that that article from Deadline and the claims from The Rock and his production company are misleading. So basically, WB is saying that The Rock was lying about Black Adam being a profitable movie. Because I told you this anyway. I told you it was not a coincidence that that Deadline article came out just mere hours after the Hollywood Reporter expose came out. And one of those things they said that Black Adam has no chance in hell of getting a Black Adam 2. But they didn't mention spin-offs because The Rock's been talking about spin-offs for Hawkman and Dr. Fate. Maybe that's something that can happen. Maybe it's not. Consider it. It's all about what James and Peter are deciding to do. And again, this whole scenario as well is in David Zaslav's hands, because he may go with Guns and Saffron's pitch or he may reject it. And if he rejects it, it's back to square one. And who knows if they stay, they go. But yes, basically Warner Brothers Discovery are claiming that The Rock has been misleading people about the profitability of Black Adam. Another embarrassing situation for everyone involved. But this is what happens. It's uncomfortable, isn't it? Because you've got the old leadership in Toby Emmerich and Walter Hamada, who allowed Margot Robbie and The Rock to be in charge of their own productions, and they made a mess of it. But we have to say, The Rock made more of a mess of his production. Black Adam is a half-okay, entertaining movie, but you can see that it's a bit of a mess of a production, and at the end of the day, it was a mistake for Black Adam to be in his own movie. But who knows? If the movie starred somebody else and, you know, there was, let's say, better people involved in the making of the movie, maybe a Black Adam movie could have worked. But ultimately, everyone, we know the truth here. That a Black Adam movie shouldn't exist, and he should have been the villain in a Shazam trilogy. But The Rock didn't do that. And this is the problem in giving The Rock the opportunity to play Black Adam. Maybe it's something for the comments that you can let me know about. I do read your comments even if I don't respond later on, so please put them down there. I will try and respond to all of them. But do you think that The Rock should have played Black Adam in the first place? This is another situation amongst loads of messy situations over at DC right now. But I think this week is going to be a huge palate cleanser. DC fans are divided once again since that THR article from last week, and they're asking a lot of searching questions of James Gunn, Peter Safran, and David Zaslav. Right now, from the outside looking in, it's an absolute calamity and a mess. What happens next in this saga, I am intrigued to find out. And if you follow me here on Movies TV Mad, whether it's on Twitter or here on YouTube, you will be the first to know. And not only will you know the news, I will unpackage the news and tell you where it all lies and how it works. And I won't tell you how to think. I will give you the facts. I will give you my opinions from my experience within the industry. And then, my friends, you can make your own minds up. This has been Tuesday's edition of the DC Universe Daily here on Movies TV Mad with me, Mick, your host with the most. Just ask your girlfriends and your wives. Please like, share, comment, subscribe, hit the notification bell so you never miss this beautiful perfection. And I'll see you again in the next video. Until I see you again, goodbye, au revoir, auf Wiedersehen.